I pulled up to my own house a little before midnight, a day early off a job out in the foothills, meaning to surprise my wife. And there was a truck in my driveway that wasn't mine, parked easy and familiar like it belonged there. And the porch light was on, and I knew before I'd even shut my engine off that the man inside my house was not there to fix the dishwasher. I'm going to tell you something hard up front, so you know what kind of story this is. I did everything right. I didn't kick the door in. I didn't put my hands on anybody. I kept my head. I got a lawyer. I followed every rule a good man is supposed to follow, and the law still handed me an outcome that would have turned most men bitter for the rest of their lives. By the time it was over, I, the faithful one, the one who'd kept his vows and kept the lights on for 22 years, was the one writing the checks. So this isn't a story about justice the way you're hoping. It's a story about what a man does when he does everything right, and the system rewards him with a knife. Where are you listening from tonight? Tell me. I want to know who's out there. And stay to the end, because the thing I figured out, standing over a dry well, is the only thing that got me through it whole. And I think some of you need it tonight, more than you need a happy ending. My name is Roy. I'm 47 years old, and I drill water wells in the Central Valley of California. I own a small outfit, a couple of rigs, my name on the trucks. Been doing it 20-some years. When a farmer's well goes dry, when a family out in the county turns on the tap and gets nothing but air, they call me, and I go out, and I drill down through dirt and hardpan and rock until I find them water. And there is no better feeling in this world than capping a good well and watching clean water come up out of the dark where a family was about to give up hope. I was married to Cheryl for 22 years. We have 2 kids, a girl named Sarah who's 19 and away at college, and a boy named Dylan who's 17 and a senior in high school. I'm going to tell you how a man who finds water for a living watched his own marriage run dry, and how the law of the state of California taught me the hardest lesson of my life about the difference between what's legal and what's right. Let me start with the trust, because you can't understand a dry well if you don't know how full it used to be. I was a provider, plain and simple, the way my daddy raised me to be. Drilling is hard, dirty, far-flung work. The wells aren't where the people are. They're out in the county, out in the orchards and the rangeland, and a deep well can take days. Which means a lot of nights I wasn't home, sleeping in the truck or a cheap motel out near the job, so I could be turning the bit again at first light. In a drought, and we've had drought on drought out here, the phone never stops, because everybody's well is dropping at once, and everybody's scared. And a man feeds his family in the dry years by being the one who'll drive 2 hours and drill all night. I told myself that was love. I told myself a man who'd do that, who'd come home filthy and dead tired with money in his pocket to keep his family safe, had earned a wife who was glad to see his truck come up the road. And for a lot of years, I believe she was. Cheryl and I started with about nothing. I had one old rig with more miles than sense, and a head full of what my granddad taught me about reading the ground. And she believed in me before I'd given her much reason to. We built the business together in the lean years, her answering the phone and doing the books at the kitchen counter while I was out chasing water. We bought a little place on the edge of town with a few acres and a shop out back. We raised Sarah and then Dylan. For a long stretch we were good. The kind of good you don't think to be grateful for because you assume it's just how things are and always will be. I look back now and I can see the marriage started running dry years before I noticed. The way a well does, from the bottom up. So slow that the water still comes fine right up until the day the pump starts pulling air. The level was dropping the whole time. I just kept turning on the tap and getting water and figuring we were fine. I want you to understand what this trade does to a marriage, because I don't think she set out to do what she did, and I don't think I set out to let it happen. Water doesn't keep office hours. The valley runs on it. Every almond and every grape and every dairy and every kitchen sink. And when the wells drop, The whole world out here gets quiet and scared at the same time. And they all call the same handful of men, and I was one of them. So in the years the drought was worst, the years the money was best, I was a ghost in my own house. I'd be gone before the kids were up and home after they were down, or gone for 3 and 4 days at a stretch out in some far county, sleeping in the cab with the bit still ringing in my ears. I missed birthdays. I missed Dylan's games. I missed 1,000 ordinary suppers where my chair sat empty and my wife ate across from 2 kids and an empty place. And every time I felt bad about it, I'd look at the deposit slips and tell myself, a good provider is what a good husband is. And I'd go back out. I was so proud of being needed by every stranger in the valley that I never once stopped to notice the one person who'd quit needing me, because she'd had to learn how to get by without me to keep from going crazy. I'll tell you about a warning I should have read, because it's the same one I see good men miss. A few years back, in a dry stretch where I was gone more than I was home, Cheryl told me, more than once, that she was lonely, that she felt like a widow with a husband still alive, that the kids were getting older and she didn't know who she was anymore, out on that place by herself while I chased water all over the valley. And I heard it the way a tired man hears a thing he doesn't know how to fix. I told her this was the busy season, that the money was good, that I was doing it all for us, and I went back out to the next job. I thought providing was the answer to loneliness. It isn't. A woman alone out on a few acres doesn't need a bigger checking account. She needs her husband to come home and see her. I had a wife telling me, plain, that her well was running low, and I kept drilling everybody else's. The signs that last year were all there, everyone with an answer riding next to it. She took a part-time job at a place in town, a little shop, said she needed to get out of the house and be around people, and I thought, good, that's healthy. She's been lonely. There were evenings she was out later than the shop's hours could explain, and she said she'd gone for drinks with the girls from work. And a man who's gone 3 nights a week himself is in no position to begrudge his wife a night out. There was a phone that lived face down now with a passcode where there'd never been one, and she said it was nothing, just habit. There was a brightness to her some evenings and a coldness on others, and a distance in our bed. I blamed on the years and my own bone tiredness. There was a man's name that started turning up in little ways, a fellow named Doug from around the shop, and I didn't think much of it, because what kind of man doesn't trust his wife of 22 years? There was the way she stopped asking when I'd be home, which I took for her getting used to my schedule, and never once let myself read as her, hoping I'd be gone a while longer. I had an answer for all of it. I had a pump that was starting to cough and spit, and I kept telling myself the well was fine. That's the thing about a well going dry. The signs are all there in the cuttings and the sound of the pump, plain as day to anybody willing to read them. And the only reason you miss them is that reading them means admitting the water you've counted on your whole life is running out. So that night in the foothills, when we hit water faster than I figured and capped the job a day early, I did what a husband does. I drove the 2 hours home in the dark, thinking I'd surprise her, maybe pick up something to eat on the way, climb into my own bed next to my wife a day sooner than she expected. And I came up my own road near midnight and saw that truck in my driveway, parked the way you park when you've parked there before, and the porch light on and the blinds drawn. And I sat in my truck across the road with my own house in front of me and felt the bottom drop out of 22 years. I did not go in, I want you to hear that, because it's the hinge the whole rest of this turns on. Everything in me wanted to. I'm a big man. I work with my body. And there is a version of that night where I kick my own front door off the hinges and do something that puts me in a cell and on the news. I sat there with my hands shaking on the wheel, and I thought about my kids, about Dylan asleep in his room down the hall from whatever was happening, about Sarah away at school, about what kind of father I'd be to them from a jail cell or a headline. And I put my truck in reverse. quiet. And I backed down the road. And I drove to the shop. And I sat in the dark among my rigs until the sun came up. And I made myself calm and certain about what I was going to do, which was everything by the book, no matter how much the book was about to cost me. I'll tell you, those hours in the shop were the longest of my life. I sat in the cab of my biggest rig with the door open and the valley going quiet and cold around me, and I let myself feel the whole thing. The 22 years, the lean times we'd laughed through, the kids' first days of school, all of it. And I let myself understand that it was over, that there was no version where I drove back up that road and we were fine. A marriage is a thing you build for decades and lose in the time it takes to recognize a strange truck. By the time the sun came up over the orchards, I'd done my grieving for one night, and I'd made myself a promise, which was that whatever happened next, I was not going to let it turn me into a man my children would be ashamed of. I didn't know yet how hard that promise was going to be to keep. I figured the hard part was already behind me, sitting in that driveway. I had no idea the hard part was the law. I went to a lawyer that week, a straight-shooting woman named Marisol, who'd done family law in the Valley a long time. And she told me how California works. And I want you to listen close, because this is the part that took the legs out from under me. And it's the part nobody tells a young man on his wedding day. California, she said, is a no-fault state. Pure no fault. It means it does not matter, not even a little, that Cheryl had a man in our house while our son slept down the hall. The court will not hear it. Adultery is legally nothing here. You cannot bring it up to a judge to get a better deal. It will not move the property. It will not move support. It will not move one single thing. I sat there and said, surely it counts for something. And she shook her head, kind but firm, and said, not here, not in this state, not $1 worth. Then she told me about the property. California is a community property state, she said, which means everything earned and built during the marriage is owned 50-50, split right down the middle, no matter who earned it. And the business, my well drilling outfit, the thing I'd built with these hands, that was the hard one. I'd started it before we married, so part of it was mine, separate. But all the growth, all the value it had gained across 22 years of marriage, the court could treat a big share of that as community, hers as much as mine, which meant to keep my own business, the rigs with my name on them, I was likely going to have to buy out her half of what it had become, pay her, in cash or in trade, for the privilege of keeping the thing I'd built, chasing water in the dark while she was home. I sat there and tried to make that make sense. I told Marisol, that's my granddad's trade, my name, my rigs. I bought every one of them. Her name's not on a single tool out there. And Marisol nodded, because she'd had this exact conversation with 100 men, and she said, I know, Roy, and none of that matters the way you think it should. The law doesn't see your rigs. It sees a marriage, and a business that grew inside it, and it splits the growth. She told me men lose their whole companies this way sometimes, have to sell the thing they spent 30 years building just to cut the check, and that I was lucky mine was small enough, and I was steady enough, that I'd probably be able to hang on to it if I was willing to pay for it for years. Lucky. That was the word. I'd get to pay for years to keep what was already mine, and that made me one of the lucky ones. And then she told me the last part, and that's the one that I sat with for a long time. Spousal support. After a marriage that long, with me the breadwinner and Cheryl working part-time, the court would very likely order me to pay her monthly support, maybe for years. Alimony. To my wife, the faithful man, paying the one who'd cheated every month, so she could keep up the standard of living we'd built, possibly in a house with the man named Doug. And none of it, Marisol said again, gently, because she could see my face, none of it changes because of what she did. In the eyes of California, what she did is simply not the court's business. I want to be honest with you about what that did to me, because I think some of you are living in it right now. It wasn't the affair that nearly broke me. I could understand an affair, even hate it and still understand it. Two people, and a lonely marriage, and a weakness. What nearly broke me was the unfairness of the law. I had kept every promise. I had never once strayed, never raised my hand, never missed a bill in 22 years. I had done everything a man is told to do. Everything my father told me made you a good man. And the state was going to take half of what I built and order me to pay the woman who broke our home every month and call it justice. There is a particular rage that comes from being punished for being the faithful one. It is a rage that has ruined more good men than any affair ever did. And for a few weeks, it had me. I drove home from Marisol's office that first day, and I had to pull over on the shoulder of the highway because I couldn't see straight. 22 years. Every dry summer I'd spent away from my own kids to keep the money coming. Every promise I'd kept while she was keeping none. And the answer the state of California had for me was a checkbook and a shrug. I sat on that shoulder with the trucks blowing by, and I felt something I'd never felt in my life, which was the temptation to stop being a good man. Because being a good man had just been revealed to me as a sucker's bet. If decency got you robbed, then why be decent? If the faithful man pays anyway, then why stay faithful to anything, even to who you are? That's the question that comes for you on that shoulder of the road. And I want every man hearing this to know I sat in it, real and ugly, for a good while. That's the near miss in my story. And it isn't a person. It's what I almost became. Because the bitterness comes for you in that spot. It comes in the voice of every other wronged man you've ever heard. And it tells you the game is rigged, that being decent is for suckers, that you should hide the money, cheat the business books, drag her through every ugly thing you can, turn the kids against her, become as hard and cold and mean as the law that's grinding you. I felt all of that. I sat in my shop a lot of dark nights and felt myself starting to turn into a man I wouldn't have shaken hands with a year before. I caught myself, one night, actually working out how to underreport a couple of cash jobs so the support number would come out lower. Sitting there with my own books in front of me, figuring how to lie. And I stopped. Because I heard what I was doing, and I realized the affair hadn't made me a liar, but the bitterness was about to. I caught myself rehearsing the things I could tell Dylan about his mother, true things, ugly things, that would pull that boy to my side. And I stopped. Because a father who recruits his son against the boy's own mother isn't a father anymore. He's just one more person using that kid. The worst of it was, it all felt righteous. That's the trap. The unfairness makes the poison taste like justice, and a man can drink a lot of it before he notices it's killing him. What pulled me back was a dry well, and my own granddad's voice, and my boy. I was out on a job in the worst of it, drilling for an old farmer who'd been on his land 60 years. And we drilled, and we drilled, and the water just wasn't there. The table had dropped. The aquifer that had watered that family for 3 generations had been pumped too hard for too long by too many, and there was simply no water left to hit. Not at any depth I could reach. And that old farmer stood there and watched his last hope come up dry. And he didn't curse me. And he didn't curse God. He just took his hat off and wiped his head and said, "Well, the ground gives what it gives." And I stood there next to him over that dry hole, and I heard my granddad, who taught me this trade, who used to say, "Son, you don't get to decide what's down there. You only get to decide how you drill and how you act when it comes up dry. Your whole job is to keep your head when the ground lets you down." I watched that old man, who'd just lost the water his whole life depended on, fold up his disappointment and put it away with a quiet word and a handshake for me. No bitterness in him, just acceptance and the next thing to do. He'd been dealt the worst hand the valley can deal a farmer, and he met it like a man who'd long ago made peace with the fact that the ground owes you nothing, no matter how hard or how honest you've worked it. And I thought, if that old man can stand over the death of his farm without poison in his heart, then I can stand over a divorce decree without it. The dry hole doesn't care how good a driller you are. The law doesn't care how faithful a husband you were. And neither one gets to decide what kind of man you are on the drive home. That's the one thing in the whole business that stays yours. And something in me settled, because I realized the California law was just another dry well. It was a thing that had let me down through no fault of my own, an unfairness with nobody at the bottom of it to punish, the ground simply giving me what it gave me. And I had a choice, the same choice that farmer had, the same choice my granddad drilled into me. I could stand over the unfairness and let it turn me bitter and mean and small, and poison the years I had left and the kids I had left. Or I could take my hat off, say the ground gives what it gives, cap it clean, and go on being the man I actually was, regardless of what the law said I was owed. The verdict was not going to be justice, but the verdict was never going to be the measure of me. That was always going to be my own to decide. So here's what I did, and it's not dramatic. And that's the point. I paid it, all of it. I bought out her share of the business, fair, and I kept my rigs and my name and my trade, and I went back to drilling. I agreed to the support the court ordered, and I have written that check every single month since, on time, without a word, because being the kind of man who keeps his word didn't stop being true just because the law stopped rewarding it. I never hid $1. I never cheated the books. I never once ran Cheryl down to our kids, not one time, even when it would have been easy and even when a part of me wanted to. Because Sarah and Dylan needed a mother more than they needed to know everything. And because a man who poisons his children against their mother to win a fight has lost the only thing that mattered. I did everything right, start to finish, even after the law made it plain that doing everything right would cost me. And I'll tell you why. Not because I'm a saint, because the alternative was to let what she did, and what the law did, turn me into something my own kids couldn't look up to. And that was the one price I was not willing to pay, no matter what the court ordered. I had to sit my kids down, of course. That's a conversation I'd not wish on any man. Sarah drove home from school for it, and the four of us, what was left of the four of us, sat in the front room, and Cheryl and I told them we were divorcing. And I want to tell you the hardest and best thing I did in this whole story happened right there in that room. Because both those kids looked at me, and I could see the question in their eyes, the one kids always have, which is whose side do I take and what really happened? And I had every ugly, true thing I could have said sitting right there in my mouth. And I didn't say a one of them. I told them that their mother and I had grown apart over a lot of lonely years, that I owned my share of that we both still loved them more than anything, and that nothing that happened between us changed, that they had a mother and a father who'd be there for them all their lives. That's all I said. Cheryl looked at me across that room when I said the part about owning my share, and I watched something break open in her face, because she knew, in that second, exactly how much I was choosing not to say, and exactly what it was costing me to protect her in front of her own children, when she'd done nothing to deserve it. That was the closest thing to justice I got in the whole affair, and it wasn't revenge. It was her having to live with the size of what I didn't do, and the work held me up the way good work will. The Monday after the papers were final, I had a job out near a little farm town, an old widow whose well had quit, and I drilled her a good one and hit sweet water at 300 feet. And when that clean water came up out of the dark, she cried and held my hand with both of hers and called me a godsend. And I drove home that evening thinking, the court can take half my money, but it can't touch this, the thing I actually am, the man who finds water for people who've run dry. They handed me a judgment, They couldn't hand me a different reason to get up in the morning, and they couldn't take the one I already had. And here's the part about justice, since I know that's what you came hoping for. The law didn't give me any, but life has a way of running its own books, slower and quieter than a courtroom. The thing with Doug didn't last, the way those things mostly don't once the secret's gone, and the daylight comes in, and there's a real life to live and not just a thrill to chase. Cheryl ended up alone, with the support checks and a hole where a family used to be. And I'd be lying if I said some small part of me didn't notice, but I felt no joy in it, because I'd already let it go. My justice, if you want to call it that, wasn't her regret. It was this. My daughter calls me every Sunday from school, and my son works beside me on the rigs in the summers learning the trade. And they know, without my ever having said an ugly word, exactly what kind of man their father is. Because they watched him stay decent when decency cost him everything. The whole town knows it too. In a place this size, people see who paid and who didn't, who stayed steady and who came apart. And a man's name out here is worth more than any judgment. I kept my name. The court took the money. It never came close to the name. I won't pretend I came through it without scars. And I won't pretend I did everything right in the marriage, because a man always has his piece to own. I'd let my wife tell me she was lonely, year after year, and I'd answered her with a bigger checking account instead of with myself. I confused providing with loving, the way half the men I know confuse it. And I left her alone on that place, with her well running low, while I drove all over the valley filling everybody else's. She made the choice she made, and it was wrong. And the cruelty of how she did it, in our house with our boy down the hall, I'll carry a while yet. But I'd stopped going home long before another man's truck showed up in my drive. I don't say that to excuse her. I say it because the man who won't look at his own dry spots is the man who drills the same dry hole twice. So here's what a tired well driller would tell you tonight, for whatever it's worth. You don't get to decide what's down there. You spend your whole life drilling blind, trusting the ground. And sometimes you do everything right, the right spot, the right depth, the right casing, and the water just isn't there. And there is nobody to blame. The ground simply gives what it gives. The law gave me a dry well when I'd earned a gusher. Life will do that to you. And when it does, you will want to stand over that dry hole and curse and turn hard, and let the unfairness of it poison the rest of your days. And I am here to tell you, man to man, that is the one well you must not drink from. Because your worth was never in what the ground gave you. It was in how you drilled, and how you stood when it came up dry. The verdict is not the measure of you. The check you write with a steady hand and no poison in your heart, that's the measure of you. Keep your head, cap it clean, go drill the next one. And I'll say one more thing to the men out there who got the dry well, who did everything right and got robbed for it by a court or a law or a system that didn't care. Because I know you're listening, and I know how alone it feels. The unfairness is real. I'm not going to stand here and tell you it isn't, or that the law made sense, because it didn't. And pretending otherwise is its own kind of lie. But here's what I learned standing over my own dry hole. The people who rigged that unfairness, whoever they are, don't have to live inside your chest. You do. And if you let the unfairness make you bitter and hard and mean, then you've handed the last thing you had, your own self, over to the very thing that robbed you. Don't do it. Pay what you have to pay, keep what you can keep, love your kids, do your work, and keep your name clean. And let the bitter well run dry, without you ever once putting your lips to it. That's not weakness. That's the strongest thing a robbed man can do, and almost nobody does it. And it will save your life. I've still got my rigs and my name on the trucks, and the water still comes up out of the dark for the families who call me. And that never stopped being a good feeling. Not for one day of any of this. My daughter's thriving, and my son's going to be a better driller than I am. The check goes out every month, steady, and I've made my peace with it. Because a clean conscience turned out to be worth more than the money, and a lot cheaper to keep. This past summer, Dylan worked the rigs with me full-time before his senior year. And there was an evening out near the foothills, not far from where this whole thing started, where we hit water deep and clean right at dusk. And we stood there together, watering the dust off our boots in the runoff. And he said, kind of quiet, "Dad, I don't know how you stayed so steady through all of it." And I told him the truth. I said, "Son, I wasn't steady because it didn't hurt. I was steady because the only thing they couldn't take from me was how I carried it. And a man holds on to the one thing that's still his." He thought about that the way that boy thinks about things, and then he nodded and went back to capping the well. And I knew it had gone in. The same way my granddad's words went into me over a dry hole 40 years ago. That, right there, is what the court never could have given me and never could have taken. That's the gusher. The rest was just water under the bridge. And there's been a lot of bridges. Tell me where you're standing when you hear this. And tell me, if the ground had given you a dry well after you'd done everything right, could you have capped it clean and kept your head? I believe more of you can than think you can. Don't drink from the bitter well, brother. It never runs dry. And it'll poison everything you've got left.